We all want to be remarkable.
Your business demands it. Our communities crave it.
You know you're on the right trajectory when opportunities launch you into unexpected directions you never thought possible. Join me, Kate Volman,
and fellow marketing strategist Kyle Sexton every week as we explore ideas you're not considering.
Share stories from others like you who despise mediocrity, and discover how whatever you're building has the power to
change your business,
change your community,
change your trajectory.
I saw John Maxwell speak. I've seen him speak a few times. You know, John Maxwell, the author who's written like 70 books on leadership. He is such an incredible man. He has a house down here, and so he sometimes speaks locally. And so I saw him, and he was up on stage, and brilliant speaker, such an amazing communicator. And so he tells this story where he said this boy came up to him after one of his events, and he gets all excited. He's like, "Dr. Maxwell, I want to do what you do." And he says, "Oh, okay. What is it that you think I do?" And he said, "You get to go up on stage and inspire millions of people to live their dream and to be better." And he looked at the kid and said, I say kid, he was like, like in his 20s, young kid, young guy. And he said, "Okay, so you want to do what I do? Are you willing to do everything I've done in order to get to do what I do?" And he just said, the guy just looked at him with this blank face. And I'll never forget him sharing that story, because it was a leadership and business conference. And that's what it is. I mean, it takes years and years of practice and doing what you're so good at. And then all of a sudden when something happens and now everyone's hearing about you, or you seem to be all over the place, or your business is booming, and it's kind of like, oh, you lucky break. But no, there's, even with like apps and online digital stuff, it's like all the nights and weekends of working and things that didn't work and things you have to throw away and you start over and all that stuff. And then finally you make it big, and they got lucky. So it's crazy. People don't think through everything that it really takes. These people that just put their blood, sweat, and tears in the work that they do.
Yeah.
And you know who does that? Comedians do that.
Who does that?
Comedians do that.
Comedians? We should talk about comedians someday.
We should make that day today. This should be the day.
Okay. What business owners can learn from comedians? What do you think business owners can learn from comedians, Kate? They, these comics, they hit the road, and by the time they get to HBO, they are overnight success.
Bling.
Right? But man, they test their content, they test the delivery, they test cadence, they test audiences. There's a lot that goes into it. What you want to talk about this, Kate? What do you want to talk about?
I'm fascinated by comedians. I love hearing their stories. For whatever reason, I'm always trying to find podcasts where they're getting interviewed, and I find their process of building themselves up just so fascinating. And I think through how much we can learn from them as business owners, because like you said, they get up on stage night after night, and sometimes they do really well, and sometimes, especially when they're first starting out, they bomb. And that's just got to be the worst feeling. You're up on stage and you're telling jokes, and all you want to do is get people to laugh, and just no one is laughing. And
I wouldn't know anything about that, Kate. That's never happened to me.
Oh, you get up there and you sing.
No, Kate, what you don't know about me, perhaps, is that I used to host.
Oh, I knew you hosted karaoke.
Well, no. I don't host karaoke. I've hosted live band karaoke. I host and produce live band karaoke. But no, early on in my we'll call it my stage career, I hosted live comedy. And it was for the reasons that you just described. Like, here you have an audience. You get to test out your material. You get to bomb. You get to bomb and see what happens. See if you can get the crowd back on your side. And hosting live comedy is very different than being the comic yourself. But I'll tell you what happened one night. Owner of the club comes up to me. He says, Kyle, I got a problem. And you're just the man to help. I said, what's the problem? He said, we have promoted a 2-hour show. We've sold tickets to a 2-hour show. Our headliner is on a 60-minute contract, and I happen to know that he's not going to give us a minute over 60. Boy. And our feature is on for 40 minutes. And he's not going to give us anything over 40. And so we got 20
He asked you to do 20 minutes?
He asked me to do 20 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I said,
Did you
Kate
say
Bowman?
yes?
I've been waiting for this my whole life.
Did you have 20 minutes worth of material?
Of course I did, Kate.
Yeah, you are.
I'm a Boy Scout. I am prepared. I had it in my back pocket, and I'd had it in my back pocket for
no way.
2 months. Yeah. And you know what I did?
Oh, I was going to say, did you practice it? Was this like totally just things that you had never said out loud?
I had 60 minutes of notice that I was going to be on stage.
I did not
you didn't know that about
that.
me, did you, Kate? So similarly, when people come up to me and they say, I want to do what you do, what exactly is it that you think that I do? Oh, you're a speaker. You get up here and you tell stories. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but are you willing to do what I've done? Are you willing to go get over stage fright by singing karaoke? Are you willing to take it a step further to expand yourself and make yourself vulnerable in front of a potentially hostile audience? Not a politically hostile audience, but a socially hostile audience.
That's expecting to laugh.
Because when you get introduced, as a comic, somebody in the back of the room says, make me laugh, funny boy. Like, they are there. There's a huge amount of psychology around comedy. And for people who have ever read Comedy Writing Secrets, it is a Bible for legends like Jerry Seinfeld and Billy Crystal. And it's something that we keep referring back to because the science and the psychology of comedy has not really changed. For the same reason that it matters in a comedic setting that you put people close together in a comedy house, in a showroom, in an audience. That's why they seat people rather than just have open seating at comedy clubs. They seat you because the back of the room is going to be closed off until the front of the room is full. And there's a sweet spot within the audience. And the reason is that proximity to someone else laughing, Kate, starts a snowball. But if there is distance between my laugh and if there's no people between me laughing and somebody else in the audience, it doesn't catch.
Yeah, they're all that way. You like go in and you're like, oh, hey, new friends that I'm touching. New friends, hi.
New friends that I'm touching.
So it is. But it is.
That's a very awkward thing. Hello, new friend that I'm touching. But you didn't know you were going to get all of this comedy insight when you said, Kyle, I want to talk about the correlation between business owners and
No, I didn't realize that you
comedians.
had the same fascination as I did with the whole comedy world. I have never done stand-up, nor Kate? Do I want to. And
have you ever
I
sang
have done
with
karaoke, And I have, yeah, that's it. I've done improv. I've done a little bit of improv because that is actually, I did so there's a business here in Delray Beach called Improv U. And my friend Anthony Francis, he is the director and he teaches these improv classes. And we actually got to do an interview and talked about how improv is great for entrepreneurs. And he talked all about one of the first rules in improv is the whole concept of saying yes. Like improv is all, you're improvising things. And so you never, when someone throws an idea at you, you never shut it down and say no, otherwise it's over.
Yeah, the energy, right? The energy just goes away. And because when somebody throws an idea out, what makes improv so funny potentially is this piling on of ridiculousness and awkwardness, right? Sometimes awkwardness is just very engaging, gets people to go, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And it doesn't always have to be funny to be engaging, but when you keep saying yes, when you keep piling on yeses and you add layers of ridiculousness, the hilarity just follows. But no is actually the awkward, that's the comedy killer, right? So in interviewing an improv artist, what was it about those rules that you kind of latched onto and go, oh, that's interesting?
The one thing,
'cause I've never done improv myself.
I work out of a co-working space at a creative agency. And so we did this little workshop and one of the things that he talked about in the beginning, that idea of yes, it wasn't just yes, it's yes and. So it's yes and ... So what he talked about with business was, so instead, like when you're talking to your client, email them back. And instead of saying no, figure out how you can say yes, but don't only say yes, and I'm also going to get this to you by then, or yes, and I also wanted to let you know that. So he said, when you start to do that, you'll get a much different reaction out of your clients, because again, sometimes it's a no, but you have to be creative and figure out how you're going to yes it. So in the office, we still do it. This was months ago, and we still will be like, yes, and.
So yes, and.
Yeah. So he was talking about ways that you can kind of replace no sometimes. It's not always going to work if your clients, but think about it. Even if you write yes, but hold on.
That's a tough one for me, Kate. That's a tough one for me. And I also love.
Hold on.
I love finding a way to yes.
Let's say not replace it with no, but when you yes, there are ways that you can yes and. You live by yes and already. You're always about over delivering.
Well, yes, and you're wrong. Did I do that right?
No, I feel like you need some practice.
I'm not quite there
I need
yet.
to get Anthony in on this. He'll have a better answer for you.
So, I've mentioned my friend Chip before in previous podcasts, and Chip was an improvisational artist, and he started an improv comedy club in the Tampa area of Florida, and it has traveled all over the world, did tours through Europe and Asia and Africa and all over the place, and has some really interesting stories of Europe and Eastern Europe, especially, and Africa, and just the people and the cultures that they ran into there. But Chip also is an entrepreneur, and he and I co-founded a co-working space here in my town, and he's a software entrepreneur, and he's into all kinds of things. But he also wrote a book called Cereal, as in like Wheaties, and the cover of his book looks like a Wheaties box with him in a suit he produced a vlog, a daily video blog for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And so he goes through the lessons that he learned and the experiences that he was having during that time in his book Serial. And they're just, you know, they're little nuggets of ideas. I'd love to have Chip on podcast at some point, but there is a different breed to the improv artist, right? People who take that yes and approach to things. It's not that they don't say no. It's just that they steer towards where the yes and is going to be.
And keep going.
And like it's not that he has to, you know, people kind of get out of, like, for him, and he's gonna listen to this and go, boy, this is weird, Kyle. You're talking about me and I'm not even on your show. But for Chip, people kind of get out of his way because they see that he's pursuing a yes and there's something very there's a celebrity factor to people who do improv, right? We see this on Saturday Night Live. The best of the best make it to Saturday Night Live, and before they were there, they were a lot of them were part of Second City.
Yep.
A lot of them came through Second City, Chicago, or San Francisco, but a lot of them came through improv groups, improv houses. And one of my favorite things to do when I'm traveling is to go find improv, because improv is not just a great release and a great way to relax, but it's also a great way to keep my entrepreneurial mind moving, to be in an environment where people pile on the ridiculousness, not for the purpose of hilarity, but as I'm viewing it, I can't help but reverse engineer.
Yes.
What made it funny?
Yeah.
What made it work?
It's like chemistry. It's everything together. Like you said, I mean, I watched an interview with Jerry Seinfeld one time where he was talking about this joke that he did about Pop-Tarts, and somebody asked, well, I remember I was at when I heard this originally, before I Googled to find this video, they said, guess how long it took Jerry Seinfeld to write this incredible Pop-Tart joke? And everyone started guessing. So how long do you think it took? Well, you're going to.
You want me to guess? I'm going to say.
Okay, so 3 weeks, that's longer than most people were saying, right? They were like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 3 seconds.
I bet. Yeah,
and then really, that exact joke, the way that he finally crafted it, 2 years. It took him 2 years to write this joke, and he like shows you the process of every single word, every syllable. He talks about how jokes where he'll write a joke and he'll have to shorten a word because it's not hitting right, and how timing is so critical, and the words that every single words that you use. Words mean things, Kyle. As Kyle, words. Do you know how often I quote you with that word?
Do you know how often somebody comes up to me and says, Kyle, words mean things. I learned that from you at a conference.
Gosh. I say that
10 years
all
ago.
the time with my clients.
Oh, wow.
I'm just like, words mean things. Words mean things. And I think of you every time. So there needs to be like a little, I need to say trademark Kyle Sexton.
I don't think it's.
But yeah, so it was fascinating to listen to this joke writing. And then I listened to like Mike Birbiglia and John Mulaney and Amy Schumer and all these people. And it's so interesting to me how they, in fact, with Amy Schumer, she actually, because she won that Last Comic Standing, and she said that having to get really good at stand-up and like pulling things really tight and having those like 5 minutes, because when you said 20 minutes of you doing comedy, people don't realize that's a really long time to, especially when you stayed up there that whole time and just did 20 minutes. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah. But you know, one of the rules of comedy that improv, you have to have a base, right? You have to start with you have to start with some constraints, and you got to start out slow.
Yeah.
And figure out who's on your side. Right? You can't just go in hard and heavy, and unless you're Rodney Dangerfield, right? Who's also an overnight success. Who didn't become Rodney Dangerfield until he was 50.
Was he 50?
Right? So
yeah.
When he became Rodney Dangerfield, before that he was just whatever his birth name was. But a comic, the owner of a comedy store made up that name for him. As Rodney said, I'm reinventing myself. What I was doing before wasn't working. I'm going to change everything. So, you know who else has done that in the comedy world? Larry the Cable Guy. Larry the Cable Guy is from Nebraska. Think about that. Larry the Cable Guy, the same guy that says, redneck vocabulary, the word is sensuous. Used in a sentence, since you was up, why don't you get me a beer? That guy. Okay. Sounds like he's from, I don't know, somewhere in the South, right?
Oh my gosh.
Born in Nebraska, raised in Florida. Not exactly Southern culture. But you can go on YouTube, you can watch videos of Larry the Cable Guy before he was Larry the Cable Guy doing the exact same jokes as somebody else. Not funny. I mean, funny.
Isn't that
but not as funny. So his character, Rodney Dangerfield did the exact same thing. Rodney Dangerfield was doing his jokes as himself until he struck gold around this one line. That's the story of my life. I get no respect. I get no respect at all. It's the story of my life, I tell you. So everything in Rodney Dangerfield's wheelhouse had to revolve around that persona in order for the guy in the back of the room who challenged him to say, make me laugh, funny guy. This was his wheelhouse. These were the constraints that he gave himself. And this was the community that he was speaking to. So he attracted people who could relate to that. And at that period of time, which was 70s and 80s were his sweet spot. 70s and 80s, people were really attracted to that message. It's the story of my life. I tell you, I get no respect at all. The downtrodden, the underestimated, the poorly treated, but he took it he compounded the hilarity with ridiculousness within those constraints, within those rules. Improv has rules that allow you to compound the hilarity. Those constraints might seem like a limiting factor, but for entrepreneurs who are listening, those constraints are also the limits that propel you.
Absolutely.
It keeps you in your lane.
There's a number of books that I've read about I don't even remember. There's just been too many that I've actually read that talk about constraints and how, like, Ryan Holiday writes a lot about that with like writing, and how the more constraints you have, the more creative you'll become, because you have to think about how to keep within those. And I think it's really in that world, in the entrepreneurial world.
For people, yes, and people who manage a brand are sometimes frustrated by the constraints that a visual identity, or they get what's called radio burn. And I know you've heard of radio burn, Kate, because you're in the media business, but for trajectory listeners who are not familiar with it, it's this idea when you were a DJ, when there were DJs playing music at radio stations back in the day, they would get really tired of hearing the same songs, the same commercials 8 times a day. 50 times a week. It's a radio burn, right? And I always have to remind my audiences and organizations that I work with that that radio burn is only experienced by the people spinning the disc. When you're getting so tired of the same message, the same and the constraints that are keeping you with the same messaging and the same visual identity, when you're getting so tired of it,
yeah,
your audience is just now hearing it for the first time. And what can be so frustrating about that process is that it used to be when my first business in the 90s, my first business with employees, I had a painting company, and back then in the mid 90s, it took 7 to 10 marketing hits to turn a customer from total apathy to purchase readiness. I know nothing about you to I'm ready to buy from you. 7 to 10 marketing hits. Today, it takes more like 28 marketing hits to turn them from total apathy to moderate curiosity. More than four times, at least four times the number of touches and hits to get them halfway there. And then you don't have any control. Mm-hmm. Then it's about your digital presence. So what happens when they get to moderate curiosity? So those constraints around messaging and the lack of control, the lack of the ability to go yes and for the second half of the process of how people find you and hire you can be very frustrating to business owners. And comedians, they don't have that to worry about because they know that they're focused on their audience's audience and they get to go find a new audience. But, I think it's interesting how business has changed for comedians. Television has really changed comedy because people will watch comedy in a room on a TV all by themselves and they might not laugh at something that's hilarious. When I speak in certain states, I won't mention them, Indiana, the audience will come up to me afterwards one time and they'll go, I loved your talk. You were so funny. My goal wasn't to be funny. It's to be helpful. But I like to at least entertain myself on stage. By the way, that audience that thought I was so funny didn't laugh one time. There's certain parts of the country.
I don't know.
Don't do What's up with that?
They do laugh in Florida.
Do people laugh in Florida, Kate?
However, I have experience. It's so funny. It kind of makes me think now with that smaller room, if that must make a difference. Because I remember speaking last month in a room and it was, more like 400 people. And I'm giving this presentation and, I got like a few laughs here and there. But when I'm in workshops, I'm like, no, these things kill it. And so afterwards, I had all these people come up to me and they were saying how engaging it was and how funny it was. And I'm like, oh, could you have laughed a little bit or like what was happening? So maybe there is something with that smaller room and
there's something to the science of this. Here's the science. Eye contact close to the stage. Preference for middle of the room. So if you've got a wide room, not good for comedy. I'd rather have a deep room than a wide room. Half round tables, not good for comedy.
Half round tables, why?
Not good for comedy. 6 people at a table is too. It's not. The tables take up too much room. There's too much space in between people. Laughter can't carry. What else? Stadium seating, good for comedy. Every HBO special is shot in a theater, not in a conference center.
Yeah.
Right? Theater seating, stadium seating, seats right next to each other, right on top of each other. That laughter starts with the eye contact close to the stage and it moves to the back of the room real fast. These same sorts of things can really help the educational process because that sort of connectivity in an audience helps learning, helps engagement, helps retention of the information, helps us to retain it and to keep it and to learn from it. And so, you think about this in designing your own in your own trainings and talks, Kate, because if you don't already have a place on your website where you tell meeting planners how you need a room set up, you should care about that.
Well, yeah, I do that with my workshops. I'm very clear because I've noticed that like when I do things in a smaller group, having them, we're all close and we're in a square or a circle. So we're all facing each other and the engagement is so much better. So if I go and I can't really do, or don't like to do a classroom style type setting because it's more like the walls come down. You could just see the walls come down because it's like, hey, we're all in this together. We're all working through this together. And I definitely get a much better response from it. So, and oh, absolutely.
But it's the same connectivity that we're seeking in all
and
of our
I love
audiences,
the fact that
right?
with comedy as in business, it's you have those. So with comedy, you're always getting up and trying different things and seeing what works. And some of the stuff works a little bit so you just have to tweak it. You don't have to totally throw it away, but if it doesn't work, throw it away. And then when you get up to do your Netflix special or HBO special, you only have the good stuff. You only have everything that you know is going to work. And so I think it's that concept of overnight success. If you're not really thinking through the process, we go to these shows and think, wow, that guy's really funny. Or my favorite is, oh, you're so-and-so's really funny. He should be a comedian. Oh, no, this is an art form. This is a craft. This is a very strategic kind of, this is someone's work. When you really, the best of the best of the best are like, oh my gosh, the process that they have dealt with in their career, man, it's so incredible.
Yeah, but they're not testing they're not testing the material in New York City though, Kate. They're testing their material in Quinnipiac, Connecticut. Like they're in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Yeah.
They're testing it in smaller markets because the contagiousness of success or failure in a dense environment, person to person, like major metro areas, New York City, will make or break you. And so there's so much more crafting and prep that go before mass. The same thing applies to entrepreneurs in business. Don't test in mass. Don't test within view of the masses. I live in a town called Salem, Oregon. One of the things that's unique about Salem, Oregon is that we are a major metro area without a major metro media. Right? We're an hour south of Portland, and we are part of the Portland broadcast market, and Portland won't let Salem go as part of the mass media market. Meanwhile, an hour south of us is Eugene, Oregon, where I grew up, home of the University of Oregon Ducks, go Ducks, and the same metropolitan size down there. And they have 4 television stations, a whole bunch of radio stations. They're their own media market. What happens as a result of that is that a community like Salem, without its own media, becomes a place where things get tested, where products, services, and ideas get tested. And when I was part of the chamber, I got to see how companies would come into Salem to test the viability of their product, service, or idea, because they had access to a major metro area without its own media. But if they did that if they did the same thing in Eugene, the media would come knocking on the door and they would lose the ability to test it. So the reason I tell you that is that if you're trying to test something, whisper it to a tribe, create your own venue, craft it however you'd like, put on your own event. And I'm using event as a metaphor. Be on stage, figure out who's going to introduce you in your metaphor for comedy, whatever your product, service, or idea is. But you get to decide how you want to be introduced. You get to decide how you want the room to be arranged.
Mm-hmm.
Do this quietly with your tribe. Figure out what works. And then figure out how to scale it. So many times people go up to the speaker like John C. Maxwell and they say, I want to do what you do. And they want to race to the stage and they just want the microphone and they want the audience. But the reason that Maxwell has an audience, and such a loyal audience at that, is because he did the work. He went through the steps to get there. He incorporates them in stories. You can't hear and know Maxwell unless you also you can't learn to love him unless you also know where he's been and his point of view and how he acquired it.
And you get to, and he's so good at sharing that. He's so good at putting that out there. And I would assume that asking anyone who puts out any kind of creative work in any way, product, service, anything, will say, hey, look at my first book compared to my 70th book. There's got to be, as great as his first book is, that 70th book, obviously he's been through a lot more, and you're only going to craft and get better and better and better. And so that's part of what I think is really cool. When you look back at people's work, who I look at some of these comedians and I think they're hilarious. And I'll look back at some of their work from 5 years ago. Some of them are almost the same jokes, but they changed it. And it's so much funnier, just the little tweaks. So I feel like it's this process, and it's just putting in the work, and it's showing up day after day and just knowing who your audience is and just giving them what they want and figuring out what they want that they don't even know they want. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sell them what they want, give them what they need. They didn't want a seat that was on top of another seat. They would not craft the experience that way. If people could craft their own comedy experience, they would be in a recliner, for crying out loud. But they want that experience. They want to be entertained. They want to be engaged. And they want to forget about things for a while. And in order for you to accomplish that as a comedian, you got to be able to stack the room one person on top of the other, because if one of those two people is going to laugh, the other one is more likely to laugh. So you've got to engineer the experience for people. And I hope people have figured out that we're not actually talking about comedy.
Yeah.
We're talking about creating something that's contagious. And you want to build a community of people where when you're making an impact, it catches fire. Right? Putting your content out in a medium that's more likely to get shared. Otherwise, it's a vacuum. I work with organizations who are putting their best content in an email that has a 22% open rate, and they're just wasting so much effort. When you take that same content and you put it on a blog, and then over a period of weeks, you look back on what you've blogged, you find the things that got the most reaction. And that's what you put into an email, not the other way around.
Yep.
These are things that we can actually put into place in our business that we learn from comedians. Comedians create a rule and environment where they're going to throw away the jokes that don't work, or they're going to take them back and they're going to work them out. They're going to work it out. Why didn't it work? Figure it out. Figure out if another version of it will work. In the meantime, you had other stuff that worked.
Absolutely.
Don't throw that stuff out.
I talk about that with video, with live video. There are live videos that I've done that I look back now and I'm like, ooh. But there were good things about it. There were not so good. There were things that I wanted to improve on it. But if I just kept throwing it away or deleting them, it wouldn't have helped me to build any kind of audience. It wouldn't have helped me to put myself out there, to be a little vulnerable, and now look back and say, oh, I've gotten better. So you keep showing up. You show up and you do the work. That's what I say.
Do the work. Both of my books were the result of a single blog post that caught fire in my audience. And I didn't set out to want to write a book. I just gave them more of what they wanted. But I had evidence of it. And so it was a lot simpler for me to create it. It wasn't easy to create. But because I knew what people wanted, it gave me the constraints that I needed to stay focused.
And you put stuff out for people to find.
On those things.
You put things out, and even if they didn't get a lot of traction, you waited, and then you said, oh, this is the thing. This is the piece that that really resonated with them, and now I'm going to take that and expand it. So I think we can everyone can figure out what that looks like in their business.
Today's thought of the day, Kate. You ready? This comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Unless you try to do something beyond what you have already mastered, you will never grow.
Nice.
Today's call to launch. Write down what you're afraid of. Write down what you are afraid of. If you change something, if you fire a client, if you create your own room, if you get on stage, what are you afraid of? Write it down and figure out a place where you're less vulnerable, where you can actually do that thing. A smaller room. Try Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
I like that call to launch. Hey, thanks for listening. If we could, we'd reach over and give you a big hug. But since we can't, before you go, can we ask you a favor? In order for us to create shows you can't wait to listen to, we need your feedback. So please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. It'll only take a minute, but it will mean the world to us, especially if you decide to give us 5 stars. And if you really loved it, take a screenshot, share it on your favorite social media sites, and invite your friends to join the party. Until next time, get trajected.
I'm not going to do any more comedy, Kate.
No? You're done?
Nope. I'm done.
It was
I got
one and
out
done?
of it. No, I mean, I hosted live comedy for 2 years, so I was throwing stuff in all the time. And you try to, you want to see where I'm testing out new material? Come see me host a show, a live band karaoke show with the band. In between songs, I'm cracking jokes. I'm testing out material. I'm evaluating my audience. All that. That's what I do.
It's what I do.
What I do.
Thing.
Can't stop it.
Can't stop, won't stop.